I'd like to welcome tonight Ian Cooper. Now Ian heads up EA's Technology Innovation Delivery team, delivering improvements in network modelling and self-service connections to support the net zero transition. Previously, Ian was innovation lead at UK Power Networks, overseeing the innovation pipeline for one of the smartest utilities in the world, and chaired the ENA UK National Innovation Managers Working Group. And I understand that our power network is considered to be one of the smartest in the world, as judged by independent adjudicators. Ian's a chartered engineer with a master's degree in electromechanical engineering from University of Southampton. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Ian, and I'll come back afterwards to help manage the question and answers later. Ian.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening, everyone.
Can you turn the lights down?
Yeah. Sure. I'll let someone sort the lights, but while I've already been introduced, and so my previous company, let me introduce who I work for now. EA Technology, EA is just EA now. Once upon a time it stood for the Electricity Association, but it is just EA. We've been working with power network operators for a very long time, helping them solve problems, go through innovation, R&D, and developing those products and solutions into commercial offerings that have changed how networks operate in the UK and also around the world. We provide a wide range of services off the back of that, and a number of global offices. But we're based in the UK, we're based up in Chester, or just outside Chester in the northwest, but it's a pleasure to be with you all here. I, mostly for my sins, work remotely in the modern world, so I live locally in Crawley, so IT Sussex is my local network. So I know our office quite often hosts the local, I think it's Merseyside and West Cheshire IET network up in our office, and doing some things there. So today I'm going to speak to you a little bit about what do we mean by grid connections, why are they important, and in that of the title, what do we mean by self-service? What difference does it make to people through the journey to connect to the electricity network or the grid, and then a little bit of time looking at the current state of the art and some of the work that we've got on and where this is heading into the future. But before I go any further, I'd like to ask a question, so if I may. So who here has a connection to the grid? So I think, as someone said, everybody, unless you happen to live in an off-grid house somewhere in rural areas, you have a grid connection. You are connected to the electricity network. If I can ask again, has anyone either applied for a new connection or a change, or does work in the connections industry? A couple. Cool. Thank you. It's interesting. So hopefully for the rest of you, this will be a useful and interesting talk. Should you ever have to go through that situation, it'd be interesting to learn of your experience a little bit later on. So what do we mean by grid connections? Why are they important? Let's have a little bit of background. So our local electricity network operator, UK Power Networks, who operate the distribution network in this area, so London, southeast of England, and the east of England. If you look out, if those of you who've come up from the coast, as you drive up the A23, the really big tower line, the transmission network, is owned and operated by National Grid. But the smaller tower lines through to the cable that comes into your house is owned and operated by UK Power Networks in this area. So they, as an example, serve 8.5 million homes and businesses, roughly 19 million people. And as the network is changing, and continually changing, they've got about 10 gigawatts of generation connected in through their network now. shamelessly stealing their slides to help with some background and information. But not wishing to preempt the outcome or the answer to the title of next session's talk, I don't think hydrogen is the energy vector for net zero. I think the road to net zero is electric. And here using some data from the National Grid, an energy system operator, they do a forecast every year looking through to 2050 in terms of what is it going to take for us as a country to reach our legally binding net zero carbon emissions target by 2050. They plot 4 different scenarios, and those different scenarios have different balances of consumer behaviour, of technology transformation, and 3 out of the 4 of them hit net zero by 2050, just. But looking slightly closer, if we look to 2035, what I can tell you, who knows what 2050 looks like, but I can tell you, but in 2035, almost all of us will be driving an electric car. Based on the information technology available now, that is pretty much going to happen. By 2035, there's a question as to how we will heat our homes. There's quite a lot of uncertainty as to whether by that point we will all be installing heat pumps or not. But at least 2 of the scenarios that are modeled show that actually by that time, almost every house that replaces a gas boiler will be putting in a heat pump. So why am I showing this? This is going to be a lot more electricity network capacity that's needed, a lot more connections, either connecting devices onto existing connections or newer and bigger connections to the network. And so that's going to need a lot of work. So if you were in the business of looking for a new job, I appreciate that's not many of you. The electricity industry is a good place for job security for the next 30 odd years. But there are challenges associated with this. You may not have seen the graphs on the last slide. You may well have seen this in the press. So a little while ago there was an incident that became quite well covered in the national media about West London having run out of demand capacity for new connections. So primarily in that area, because of some really good data connections along the M4 corridor, lots of data centres want to connect onto the network, and they'd connected on and used all the available capacity. And so new housing estate developments, then seeking connections, couldn't do so until some very, very major reinforcement work had been carried out further up on the network, on the transmission system. And this got a little bit political. But I think from working inside the industry, I have to say I'm very pleased whenever the industry does hit the headlines, because it means that stuff happens. The issue with grid connections and some of these challenges, constraints have been known about for many, many years. But actually, once you hit the press, then the political will is there for things to change. And so things are changing. Things are now changing very, very rapidly. Let me give you a little bit more detail behind this problem. So this is specifically a demand constraint or demand challenge in that area, but the issue is to do with connections queuing up behind each other for the available capacity on the grid. So looking at larger generation here on this slide. So again, stolen this from the Energy Networks Association. Credit to them. We currently have about 112 gigawatts of electricity connected, and looking to 2050, potentially we only need another 275 gigawatts. We only need another 2.5 times what we have. Currently, queuing up to get connected in the UK is 527 gigawatts. So there is a lot more generation that currently wants to get connected in the UK than potentially is needed through to 2050. So that presents a challenge. If we look on terms of increase, there's some stats on the increase in demand that we might see by 2050 or demand generation, what that fills up this. But it's really, really interesting to see actually how people have jumped on. Actually, there's an opportunity here. I want to get into development, but this is a problem because all of these queue up They take up the capacity, it all takes time, and so if you want to get transmission capacity in many areas, you're talking 10 years or more, 10 to 13 years to get a connection. Can you imagine that? If you said, I want to build a house, and we said, great, you can build your house tomorrow, but you can't connect it to the network for another 10 to 13 years. You can't get electricity. So that is the problem that the industry is facing. And some great media attention has helped lead to some progress to change. So here are a couple of things that are going on. So government, the fairly recently named Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, formerly BEIS, and something else before that. Now DNOs, Ofgem, who are the regulator for the electricity industry, and the main industry players, are now actually working together and moving this forward. There is a plan, a connections action plan. It's been put together jointly by the regulator and by government, and that has set up a delivery board that has oversight of everything that's going on. And so the industry is changing. And for an industry that is built around assets that last 60 plus years, it's changing incredibly quickly, which is good. It's really exciting. There's a number of reform points. I'm not going to go into them now. Happy to give a little bit more detail in questions later on the current changes that are being proposed. But the connections process is changing, certainly for bigger connections up at the top of the industry. If you look further down the network, change has already happened. So last year, the access and charging reform that's been underway for some time, and this is why I say it's a good thing that the industry is now changing quickly. This change has been in development since 2017, went live in 2023. So it's the time we're moving far too quickly now as a nation towards net zero to be able to wait for that long for industry policy to change. But this move was to reduce the cost that connecting customers pay for reinforcement. Let me work out through a number of those terms. So if you're wanting to connect onto the electricity network, let's consider you're building a house. Your extension asset is the cable that goes from your house to the cable that runs up and down the street that all of your neighbours are already connected onto. So currently, or previously, you pay for that, you still pay for that. If you need to connect in, build a connection, you need to connect to the network, you still pay all of that. The question is, what happens if the cable that runs up and down that street was full, had no available capacity? Previously, you would have to pay a portional contribution for the reinforcement of that cable. By reinforcement, we mean making it bigger so that it can take your load or your generation. Now, for demand connections, that is fully funded. If you're connecting as a generator, you still pay a portion for the reinforcement at the same voltage level as your connection, but if you are a demand customer, you don't pay. So why is this change? Why has this happened? So the idea behind people contributing to this reinforcement cost was to steer people who wanted to connect to where the available capacity is on the network. So if there's available capacity over here but not there, connect there. Go use it up. Let's not invest a lot of money that's ultimately us, bill payers' money, in reinforcing the network over here when there's available capacity there. As you look towards a net zero future, that just doesn't make sense anymore, because people want to put electric vehicle chargers where cars drive and where they want to stop at motorway service stations. They don't want to put them where there's available capacity, because invariably there's going to need to be new connections everywhere, whether or not the capacity is there. So that steer towards connecting customers is no longer needed, it's no longer relevant. It's just an impediment to people connecting. And effectively, you still pay for it as a connecting customer, but rather than paying for it up front at your connection, you pay for it over the following however many years that you are connected through your use of system charges. So this is quite a significant reform that came through, that went live last year. So for smaller connections, for most of the industry, this has already gone through. There's a few other changes, but I won't go into those now. So hopefully this has provided you a little bit of background around the electricity industry, around connecting to the grid, and kind of what's going on in the industry at the moment. So you can see that there's a high volume of connections, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of change, and so it's quite an interesting place to be. I'm going to move on now for a few minutes to talk about self-service and actually the connections journey that an individual might take. So consider the example I used earlier, that you are building a house. You're privileged enough to have some land in your back garden and you want to build a house there and connect it to the network. Now, consider that example. If you, pretty much wherever you are in the UK now, you can find a budget price range for your connection on your network operator's website. And you can have a look at that and decide, yes, I want to carry on. Then you have to fill in a paper form or an online form with all the relevant details to apply for connection. And at that point, this goes over to UStop, it goes over to the network operator, and they've got a number of largely manual, for most of them, steps to go through. Firstly, they've got to do a check for the available network capacity, they've got to calculate the cost for connection, and then they've got to prepare the quote to issue back to you. For this sort of small connection, it's a regulated service. They're required to respond within 5 working days. Typical industry response is 3 days plus, up to 5 days, in some cases 6 days, looking at the average period for the last few years. So if you're like, I want to know how much this is going to cost me, actually you're sat waiting for a while this is being worked through. But as I said, it's a manual process. It delays you in terms of your consideration, your decision making, perhaps less so if you've got some land and you're building a house on it, because where are you going to go? You're going to go there. But if you're looking at installing electric vehicle chargers on the street, actually you're making decisions about multiple locations. And you might put in, say, I want to have a look at this whole area, I want to install 10 chargers, where are the best places? Then you want that information, you want it quickly. And you want to be able to act on it, to make your investment in your planning decisions. And so because of actions like that, people will put in, say, I might want 10 locations, I'm going to put in 50 requests, and then I'll pick the 10 best, and we'll go forwards. So that's very, very inefficient for the network operator. A lot of that work ends up going to waste. No one connects for the vast majority of the quotations that are produced, which isn't a good way of running a system. So self-service, if you can get the customer to do as much of this as you can, if you can provide the right amount of information, the right level of detail, so that all of this that normally as a network operator you would have to do yourself, so the customer can do it, actually that's transformative. Because then the customer can make their own decisions, they get access to the information more quickly, and they can move forward, and your operating costs are reduced. So let's have a look through at each of those 3 steps in turn, and let's see what you have to do in those steps, and potentially how that can be self-served. So the first step was to check for network capacity. So before you can assess whether there's available network capacity to connect, that you have to do some work. It all relies on data. Lots of different bits of data being brought together to be able to provide the answers. If you work for a DNO and the DNO has some good data and systems, this may be all together already for you. It's really quick, really easy. This may not be the case. We know this isn't the case in many of the operators in the UK. But it is something, it's all about the data. So what data do you need? You need to know what network assets are out there. You need to know where they are and how they're connected. For instance, if you are building a house in a plot of land, you need to, when you're modelling that, you need to know where's the cable in the street that goes past, and you need to know where that's connected to, and what type of cable it is, how much current can it take before it gets overloaded. You'd also need to know what other what other customers are connected onto the network in that area. What is their existing demand? What is their generation? What is going on already before you add in the new connection? And depending on the data quality in the systems, this can be a very quick and easy job. It can not. One of the things that we've been doing with a number of the network operators is actually drawing in their data from a number of different systems and actually presenting it in a couple of tools. So it's readily there and available for the internal users to be able to use. And these are the study results for network capacity for one of those examples. But a couple of years ago, we were talking with one of the network operators who said, well, can't you make this information available in a simple, easy-to-use form for third parties? And we said, well, yes, if you're happy with this, yes, we can do it. And so externally, all of these lines are where the network assets are. And the red, amber, green colouring gives a very simple view as to what the available capacity for connection is. So how do we work out that colouring? There's some checks that are carried out. Firstly, is there enough thermal capacity? Can you carry enough current through the cables, through the overhead lines, through the transformers? We also check what is the voltage at the end of the feeder and at the point of connection. Quick aside, simple question. What's the single phase, low voltage mains, what's the nominal statutory voltage in the UK? 230, it used to be 240. What is the allowed voltage range?
-5 to +10, I think.
It's -6 to +10. Well done. To allow for the fact that it previously was 240 volts. So the upside is much higher than the low side, but good guesses. Thank you. So we need to know that the voltage at not just where you connect, but at either end, the extremities of the cable, is within that range. It's within those limits. We also need to understand the network impedance to make sure that if there is a fault or something happens, actually that enough current will flow that will operate any protective devices like any fuses or circuit breakers. I'm not going to ask what the nominal value for limits for earth loop impedance are, but it's for new networks typically is around 0.25 ohms. For older networks, typically around 0.35, but it varies depending on the earthing arrangement you've got. That's ask me afterwards. You'll probably get me out of my depth on that topic very quickly. And there are a couple of other checks that can be carried out. But all of this is stuff that you can work out manually from a number of paper data systems, using Excel, bringing information together. It takes some time. But actually, if you can get the data into one place, you can calculate all of this automatically. You can set the limits in, you can set the thresholds. We know what we're designing to, and you can build the system to be intelligent so that actually you can have a non-technical user can come in and you can give them the right answer, provide the information in the right way through the self-service tools. You can also provide some really good tools for DNO staff, which can help make their lives easier. So once you have done the check for network capacity, the next one on the list was working out what the connection is going to cost. So how do you do that? Well, first you need to have some information around where the connection is going to be, what is it, because you need to work out the route from where the connection is going to be through to where the network is. And the requirement is that it's the lowest cost route. That is the requirement on the network operators. They have to provide you with the lowest cost option, which is, hey, that's a good thing, right? So once you've worked out what that route is, you can then generate a bill of materials. You can then understand actually how much is it going to cost to do this work, and then from that bill of materials you can develop the price and add in any particular on costs or other information. So if you are an experienced connection designer, you can work through this fairly quickly and you'll get the right answer most of the time. The bill of materials here is something that our tool generated automatically based on a non-expert user putting in some information and an automatically generated cable route. So let me explain or show what I mean. So this is our tool. I think one example of it that is in use with one of the network operators in the UK. And so once you've gone through their website and you put in some details about what you want to connect, it passes you through here. You have the ability to say, here's my site, here's my plot of land in my back garden, and here's the new premise, the new house that I want to build. And you can put on there, where do I want my meter point to be? Where do I want the cable to come into the property? And then the tool here will generate automatically the lowest cost route, give or take, from that meter point to the electricity network where there is available capacity for you to connect. And then once you click submit, as video has gone faster than I can talk, apologies, it then takes a screenshot of that, it generates a plan of that, it generates the bill of materials for you, converting from what's just been drawn as a line on a map into a set of electrical components that will build a compliant network following all of the rules for the network operator. And it can do it all. So with this tool working in the background, this takes a lot of the intelligence for the simple connections, for the easy connections, and then generates the cost for you fully automatically. And so once you've got this sort of technology, it enables you to have a self-service journey through that point for your customers. What do you do next? So after you've worked out the cost, you need to issue a quote. So often the term is used, an acceptable quote. So a quote which it is possible for a customer to accept. The price that is on there is not always the final price. There are a number of caveats there have to be for a desktop study, or for any study. If something comes up that hasn't been identified, the price may change, and that is clearly there within the legal conditions, terms, and so on. But it is something that a customer can accept, can pay money for, and then move through to a connection. So often when people are developing these, they'll design a plan on the network records. They'll show where all this information is. So the customer's drawn something, they'll draw it up again, they'll add some annotations, then they'll put it together with the letter, and you'll get a lovely letter. Or that says, there you go, there's your connection, there's your price, and some other information. But actually we've been working with a number of our customers to say, actually, how can you automate this? What information do you need to provide? What details do you need to work out to be able to give this directly to a customer and say, well, actually, we don't need one of our staff to see this before it goes out the door. And so with a number of the network operators in the UK, we've been working along this journey to be able to help them to provide a fully end-to-end self-service journey. I should say, kind of before I finish this, in the interest of disclosure, that none of our current clients have yet said, yes, we want to be able to put an acceptable quote out the door without someone seeing it. They've all gone, so we want the technology to be capable of it, but we want to check. We just want to have a check. Just have that confidence, that trust. And actually, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But what they have done is they've reduced the effort that their staff need to put in for every connection quite significantly. And they've sped up the turnaround time. So actually they can get a much higher rate of same-day responses for connection requests. And by providing a lot of the information up front in terms of available network capacity, where people can connect, where it might cost. They've reduced a lot of the optioneering, a lot of the kind of speculative inquiries that people might put in. To be able to say, well, I was going to put in 50 different inquiries, but actually I can look around and I only want 10, so I only put in 10, maybe 12 or 15. And that's a much better result all round. So that's where we are today. Where are we going? Where are we heading through into the future? So a lot of this section is about improving each of these steps. So it's the 3 steps that we were talking about. It's calculating the available network capacity, where you can connect, it's calculating the cost, and it's generating the quote. And so I'm going to look at each of those 3 steps in turn and give you some information about what we're doing at the moment to improve what we can provide, and so get a better result more of the time, and then move further forward on the self-service journey. So firstly, improving capacity calculations. How do you get a better answer for how much capacity there is on the network? Invariably, it's getting better data or more data. So ATC up here, because we love an acronym. As engineers in any industry, we love it. We love a good acronym. Is accepted to connect. So what about people who have already said, if you've got some land and you're building a house, you want to connect it to the other street network, does anyone else on your street have a plot of land as well? Are they doing the same thing? If they've already got in and got the capacity, as a network operator providing information to you, do they need to say, well, actually there isn't capacity anymore, because you've got 5 people already applied to it, we've already sold it to them, they just haven't built yet. So that information is not normally in the network records that we bring in from the district, from the network operators, because it's not a GIS record, it's not built, it doesn't exist as an asset. So if we can get an additional data set that has this information, we can combine it into the model that we build, and then we can use that to tailor what we present out. And so there's a number of other areas where we're looking at saying, can we improve the data that we use, or bring in more data to be able to provide a better result? Using network monitoring, or very occasionally smart meter data, is the other main area we're working on. So for one of our systems, we're taking some network monitoring data and we're using that to calibrate the model. So we calculate a model result, and then we use the monitored data to adjust that to account for gaps in the model data. And so there's different things that we can do using more information to provide a better result, and ultimately it will give a more accurate answer to people who use it. We've also done a piece of work around looking at actually what are the different ways the network runs, because normally the network is configured in a certain way, your house is fed from a certain cable from a certain substation, but every so often there is a fault. So it may be an underground cable fault, or a tree hitting an overhead line if it's a windy day like it has been a little bit today. And so the network sometimes will be reconfigured to operate in a different way. For a low voltage circuit, this isn't really a design consideration, but as you move up to higher voltages, actually being able to understand how one circuit is supporting another circuit is quite important, because your design considerations are not just how much can this one circuit take, but actually I need to consider what these alternative arrangements might be, such that when something happens, because faults happen, there are options that the network operator can do to get the lights back on in a timely manner. And I'm sure that many, if not all of you, have been subject to a short interruption where the lights have gone out, and actually, it's a power cut, but before you found a torch or a candle, actually the power's come back on again. invariably in that circumstance, that's because the control systems the network operator has have just reconfigured the network using remote switching to get you back on via a different cable. And that's great, because a faulty asset is still faulty, it's still off, but you're back on supply, so everyone's happy. Right? That's certainly much better than it would be if you had to stay off for 45 minutes or an hour until someone's come and switched the network around manually, or for several hours for someone to come and actually fix the fault. So allowing for that at the design and the planning stage gives a lot more flexibility in the future. So it's something that makes the tool set that we have applicable to more people. I also want to talk a little bit about improving the cost calculations. The flowchart is not an eyesight test. It's okay. It's intentionally that small, but to show the detail of some of the logic and some of the thinking that you have to work through to be able to work this out. So that's summarised. All of that is summarised by the four bullet points on the left. So if you're looking at cost and building up the cost of a job, what are the different elements that impact that cost? Can you understand more of them, quantify more of them, either automatically using data sets, or can you ask a customer who's applying for a connection some simple questions that they will understand and be able to answer to be able to give a much better and more accurate cost, to reduce the kind of the what ifs or the this is the price but that you would otherwise have. And the reality is there's quite a lot you can do, because we've been doing some work with one of the network operators around traffic management costs, and so actually, you know, we know how much it costs to dig up the road and to do various other standard things, but actually if you're doing a longer cable route and you potentially have to close some lanes, or if you're unlucky enough to be trying to dig up a road in London, pay lane rental charges, or some of these other things, how do you quantify what these are in the tool so that you can then pass that information immediately out to the customer? Because some of these costs can be very, very material on the total cost of the connection, certainly if you're running over a fair distance. And these capabilities, what we can do is usually limited by data and what data is available and actually what we can do. But there is quite a lot more that we can do than we currently have. And we're working with one or two of our clients to test this and actually to explore how far we can take it. And it's exciting. It's looking really good. There are plenty of other opportunities in this cost space to be able to improve as well, where we can get more data, we can bring it in, and then use that information to help make decisions. So, generating quotes was the third step. One of the things that we have developed working with the network operators is around how do you make it easier to make quotes? How do you give them a really simple tool set, a really simple workflow, so that it's quick and it's easy? And you saw earlier the self-service design of a connection, and if we get time a little bit later, I might brave a live demo and show you that. But we've done a lot of work with the clients around how streamlining an internal tool, bringing all the right information to the right place, so that actually it's quick and easy for them to generate this quotation pack, and so the right information then gets out to customers. So one other area that we are looking at, one current research project, innovation project that we're doing with UK Power Networks in this area, is called AutoQuote, and we're looking at, can you do this firm connections journey? Can we provide self-service connections, self-served acceptable quotes for 11 kV, 11,000 volt connections? Which is a really interesting question. Has been a really good challenge for us to work through on this, and to work through with them to say, actually, what what can you do? Are any of the steps different to using a low voltage connection? And how can we make that work for our customers? And yes, they are, because you don't apply for an 11,000 volt connection to build a house in your back garden. In general, people who apply for these connections have knowledge of the industry, they have expertise. And so we can ask more detailed questions and get different information from them. And so some of the steps are the same. You identify your location, you draw your plot, your point of connection, but then you've got a number of additional bits of information you need to put in. Are there any additional works? Are there temporary works? Can you provide us some other information about the route that you're taking? And then from there, it provides a set of details, your quotation summary immediately that you can check. And then once you've checked that, it will send you a quote, which is an acceptable quote. So there are caveats in it, but you can accept it and then move through the journey and get straight into getting your connection. And it's been a really interesting journey working with them along this process and finding out what we can do, what we can't do, where some of the limits of the available data and technology are. But we are hoping to get this live and out to its first users in anger quite soon. It's currently in the testing phase with UK Power Networks, and I'm not allowed to say when we're expecting to get it live, but it's soon. It is soon. So that is the last thing that I wanted to share in terms of kind of the state of the art. Where are we now? Where are we moving forward to in the next few steps? But hopefully this and the overview of grid connections and a little bit of that journey has been interesting for you. It's been useful. I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to me, for being a good audience and engaging with the questions. But I'm yours now. I'm very happy to take any questions that you've got and answer what I can. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. So do we have any questions for Ian?
Can you get back to slide 11?
That one.
Yeah, so you went with the non-firm offer workers and the TEC obviously during.
So TEC, or the tech, is transmission entry capacity. So National Grid, ESO, have a register of anyone who is connecting to the transmission network or to a distribution network but taking up transmission capacity. And you have to, when you get into that queue, you have to make a down payment. And if you fall out of the queue, you lose that down payment as part of the process of making sure people just aren't speculatively just throwing in connection requests and blocking things up. So there is an amnesty that's been proposed to say, if you're in there, if you want to get out, just say now. If you want to reduce your amount in the queue, just say now. And you can do that. There's no penalty, there's no charge. We'll refund the money. And so that was one of the actions that's being done to help free up some available capacity in the connections queue. And has, from what I understand, has freed up a few gigawatts of capacity already. And I don't know, maybe doing some more over the next few months while they're rolling through this process. Non-firm offer development, so on distribution networks for some time, wind back. A normal connection to the network is considered firm if you can have that capacity anytime, day or night, any day of the year. It is considered not firm if some of the time you can't have that capacity for whatever reason. So it may be that there's a lot. You're a generator. There's a lot of solar farms already on the network. They might say, actually, you can generate loads overnight, but you can't generate anything during the day because there's all this other generation. And so that would be considered potentially a non-firm offer. Or that some of the time the network might be reconfigured, we might have to ask you to turn down or switch you off for a limited period of time. So this has become established in the distribution networks, but it's not something that's used at transmission. And so they've been developing for transmission connections or for transmission capacity a way of saying, can we contractually, if people are willing to accept a non-firm offer, either permanently or temporarily, can we get someone connected? So the economics, you might be disconnected for, I don't know, a couple of weeks in a year for whatever reason, but we can get you connected to the network 10 years sooner. Does that work out for you and your investor backers? Yes, okay, happy days, come on, connect. No, okay, well, sit in the queue and wait, and when we can give you a phone connection, you can have it. You can come and connect then. So it's one of the proposals that's being worked through to say, actually, how can we get more of this predominantly generation connected more quickly? Does that help answer your question?
Okay, next question. Mike.
Two related questions. One is you mentioned that I think it was 457 gigawatt hours of storage was required. Now, where is the storage going to be? What's the assumptions on that? This is for net zero, I think. Oh, sorry, it's 158. Yes.
This one. So this is what is currently in the connections queue. So these are people all over the country who have battery sites, predominantly batteries, I suspect a few others, but mostly batteries, up and down the country who are saying, we want to connect to the electricity network, all over.
Okay, the second question is related because I'm one of the people just installed a battery system, and I very much advise it's very successful. But in connection with connections, then does it make a difference to what you would be charged by the connection charge if you've got a battery system? If you propose, and could the builders in West London install battery systems in every house and then they get permission for a connection?
The short answer is it's complicated. The longer answer is yes, it is worth getting a battery system if you have the capital. Probably wait a couple of months because I think there's currently some legislation in process that will make buying a battery storage for your house VAT exempt under the rules that might be coming in April. So have a look round. If you're planning on buying one, have a look round first. Public service announcement.
Too late.
If you bought one already, oh well, you're making money off it. They make money because you can get a tariff from an energy supplier where you buy electricity cheap to charge up, and then you use it off the battery, and that does make a lot of economic sense. So it is absolutely worthwhile. But if you've got the cash sitting around, it's definitely worthwhile. Does it solve the problem of being able to connect? Yes and no. It depends a little bit on how you treat storage and how you model it at whatever level. So if the question is, what freedom do you want to do with what you want with your battery when you want it? Because how big is your battery? How many kilowatts?
15 kilowatt hour.
15 kilowatt hours.
And I've already, just as an aside to give you, I've already twice been used by, well, Eon or one of the network energies for peak smoothing.
Yeah.
So they charged my battery, then grabbed the power.
So
and they give me a 5 times cost of electricity, which I'm very pleased about.
So it's fantastic. So the energy capacity is the 15 kilowatt hours. It's probably either a 3.5 or a 5 kilowatts power throughput. So the question is, how do you model it in your planning assumption? Do you say this is a 3.5 or 5, say 5 kilowatt demand that can be a demand at any time, so your battery could be charging up along at the same time as his electric car, and their heat pump's running, and they've got doing the cooking and all of this, and it's going to come at the worst case, so therefore I need to model it as a 5 kilowatt demand, actually that's made your house far worse from a modelling point, and actually it's then, no, definitely you can't connect. Or do you say, actually, this battery is only going to be working to reduce your peak demand, so it's never going to be a 5 kilowatt demand at the same time as the electric car's charging up, the cooker's on, all the electric lights and heaters on. It's going to be exporting then, it's going to be reducing your consumption. And so actually it nets off your house. Your house is a benefit to the grid rather than a detriment. So it's how do you model it? What assumptions do you make when you're planning? And one battery in one house is an example. Oh, that's nothing. But a housing estate of 1,000 homes with 1,000 batteries in one location, we're talking megawatts. Some of the new battery sites that are being installed, we're talking ridiculous numbers of megawatts that are being built. So that's a huge, massively material impact on the grid. So it depends is the long answer. Well, it's complicated is the short answer. It depends on how you model it is the slightly longer one.
Thank you.
Okay, next
But
question.
well, continuing on batteries, is it worth having a battery system? I would have the concept of a battery system that's managed by the DNO, so the whole housing estate is managed as a collective battery, if you like, and you control when it's charged, when it's not charged. So you've got a massive storage capacity that you can decide you're going to charge it at night and balance the load out.
So there was a number of research projects and some work done a while ago around the question of how is energy storage treated, how batteries treated, because gas networks do exactly that. They're disappearing, but you've got these big gas storage towers that are owned and operated by the gas networks, and they smooth out, they do exactly what you said. In the electricity system, they are classed as a generation asset, so the legislation requires legal separation between the distribution network operator and the generator. So even if they have the same parent company, like SSE, they are legally separate. And there's a lot of lobbying to say, well, the networks should be able to own them and operate them. The regulator, the industry said no, they're going to stay as a private a generation asset. They will be subject to full competition, and actually the battery market has exploded. So I think that was probably the right answer. But there are a lot of things that drive that economic model, and I don't know if you ever look at your electricity bill and you say, actually, where does the bill go? The difference primarily between the standing charge, which is quite high at the moment because there's a lot of money being paid in to recoup failed energy suppliers, or the variable tariff, which is kind of what you actually pay for the consumption. The standing charge is primarily there to pay for the network assets. The distribution network is about 10 pence in the pound, about 12, maybe 12 or 13 pence if you're down here in the southeast. So economically, actually, there's much more. Where am I going with this? Economically, there is a much bigger driver for the energy supply costs to drive the behaviour of the battery than there is for the network costs. So there's currently a bunch of debate going on in the industry saying, actually, how do we coordinate these two so that we don't have the energy suppliers driving these batteries or these other controllable devices to the detriment of the network, but actually how do we coordinate in some way and work out, I think, which one kind of gets first bite of the cherry to say we need them to do something to make sure at the end of the day the lights stay on. and ideally the lights stay on without pushing electricity bills up too much.
And also depending on the tariff in peak time and off-peak time, and the duration of hours, whether they are long enough. In this area, we have 5.5 hours off-peak, but in Stafford, they have 1 hour longer. So that will come to the market.
Any more questions? Going back to your question on batteries, surely when we all go to electric cars, every electric car will be a battery. There isn't an idea that you will then take Rob Peters to pay Paul through his battery system, and I believe that's why the connections are going to be internet, so that the power companies can draw back your energy from your batteries and put it into somebody else's to smooth out the flow. So that's one question. The second question is, I understood that because batteries are inefficient, we were looking at converting excessive energy into hydrogen and then using that to generate. Yep. And the third one will be, I think when we've all got our electric cars, we won't want single phase, we'll probably all want 3-phase, because you're going to have electric heaters, you're going to want, instead of a gas boiler, have electric boilers, you're going to want to charge your car up and everything else. And if you want to charge your car in a reasonable amount of time, it's going to have to be 21 kilowatts per hour, which is 3-phase. So the assumptions that single phase will be okay now, I think it's out the window. I think you've got to start looking at the cost of replacing single phase now with 3-phase.
So
that's a question in a few parts.
let me see if I can get that right and potentially
3 big questions.
So the first question: vehicle to grid. Can powering using the battery inside the car support the grid? Technically, it works. Economically, it works. It is of no detriment whatsoever to the battery or the vehicle. It's an absolutely brilliant thing. I can't wait until there are actually some vehicle-to-grid chargers on the market, because it is the way things are going to go. It absolutely is. It makes complete sense in every way, shape or form that you look at it. Apart from the fact that occasionally cars are not parked on the driveway. But enough are that most of the time that, it just makes sense. So that was one. Number 2 was, our batteries are inefficient. Yes, they are. A good battery system will run at up to about low 90% efficiencies, which is a bit inefficient. I think the round-trip efficiency for hydrogen at the moment is about 70%-ish. Somewhere between 70 and 80% round-trip efficiency. So, yes, batteries are inefficient. Hydrogen is worse.
Currently, until they find some means of how to store hydrogen in a much more efficient manner.
It's not the storage, it's the conversion. So it's converting from electricity to hydrogen and then from hydrogen back to electricity. The round-trip efficiency at the moment is lower than it is to do that with a chemical battery.
Why didn't you use hydrogen for heating and not converting back to electricity?
The view of everybody that's recommending to the industry who isn't either in the gas industry already or making stuff to do with hydrogen says hydrogen for domestic heating is a bad idea, including the government now. So for a long time there has been this huge question of, is everyone going to get hydrogen boilers? The answer to that now officially is no. In some areas it will make sense, blanket across the UK, no it will not, which is great because it means actually that policy decision is being made. Now the electricity networks can invest and say, yes, now we know we're considering for transport and heat, so actually we need to think about 3-phase supplies into properties.
We're talking about the electricity generated by wind farms, how you use that energy, and either got to convert it into a battery because you've got excess at night, or you've got to turn it into hydrogen at that close source. So that's where the hydrogen bit comes in, is that, well, do you do all the extra capacity you make on a wind farm? And there's been lots of rumours about turning it into hydrogen because it's there and then.
Absolutely. The concept of being able to store the electricity in some form is absolutely necessary. There's lots of people looking at it. But at the moment, the technology that is here now says the round-trip efficiency to go from electricity to hydrogen and back again is worse than it is in a battery. It's sufficiently worse that it offsets the capital cost of building the battery. So if you can use the hydrogen near the wind farm, it makes sense. So there are areas in the country where actually it absolutely makes sense. You've got high energy consumption, demand industry in an area where you've got a lot of generation, variable generation like wind, say Humberside on the northeast coast, the Medway area, where it makes sense to have a local area hydrogen and use it. You're right, it does, but that's in that limited space.
My third question was about the capacity, if everybody's have gone fully electric,
Yep.
and we want fast charging, we're going to have to move away from single phase to three phase.
Yep.
Has that been built into the model?
Some network operators now specify three-phase cables for all new connections for domestic properties. Some don't. It's more expensive. The reality is cars are sat doing nothing most of the time. And actually, most of the time, a single vehicle property, plus a heat pump, plus a cooker, you can run on an 80 amp continuous single phase supply. It's where you're getting places where you've got a bigger house or two cars you use a charger. Yes, you absolutely need three phase. If you want the flexibility to fast charge at home, yes, you need three phase. So that's...
Another question? Mike.
Earlier on, you were talking about all these gigawatts of generating capacity queuing up to be connected.
Yeah.
Now, what you told us this evening is about demand from customers and housing and so on. But how about these long delays we're told about before these gigawatts get connected? And all the other considerations you have to think about, fault capacity and spinning reserve and this, that, and the other. Are any signs of progress being made there?
I think, and there is huge change in the industry. So the not least to say that, let me find the slide. So these guys, who I shamelessly stole some of their content from their future energy scenarios, the energy system operator are being spun out of National Grid into a publicly owned company who are independent to operate the system and balance the system, and they've got teams of people who are looking at how can they control the electricity system of the future. If you've got the time and you're interested, NG, ESO, FES, National Grid, Energy System Operator, Future Energy Scenarios. They've got a nice glossy document that's got a load of information about what the transition to 2050 might look like, going across these 4 different scenarios in terms of how they'll transition, what their modelling is for the different uptake of different technologies, different energy flows through, and how they manage the system. And they're doing a lot of innovation, working with the network operators and generators around how do you ensure stability, how do you ensure protection still operates, how do you ensure that you keep the lights on at a net zero 2050 and all the way along the road to it. So there's loads going on, far more than I know about, but it's super interesting.
Does that mean the timescale really is coming down?
Well, that's staying put. We're walking at a fairly steady pace towards it.
Another question? Sir.
I'm familiar with the process like G98, G99. Is the grid connection thing we're talking, is that the G99 process where people make a request to connect to the grid? It's currently a paper document, isn't it?
Yes. I'm sure which way around was it? Because it was
G98
was G59 and G83, and then I forget.
G89 is the low, like 3.68.
Yeah, so it's G. Yeah.
G99 is the larger
So,
generation produced. So if you
yeah.
get 2 heat pumps, you have to have a G99. If you have an EV charger, if you're within 3 kilometres of a neighbouring property, that has to be reported on the G99. So some of what you're talking about is on the paperwork. But I think what I'm hearing is that you're going to be you're involved in a project that looks like that, so.
Yeah, so as part of the transition, so if you're a heat pump or an EV charge point or a solar on a domestic property, the Energy Networks Association for the whole country are developing a portal where it's online. You can just, and they also talk to the manufacturers. And so if the equipment is type approved, you can just go, hi, here's where I am, here's what I'm installing, can I do it? And they'll come back online saying yes or no or whatever. So for the small stuff, that's moving forward. For the bigger stuff, the connection queues are the bigger generators. So anything that requires a transmission reinforcement, which I don't know what it was, what it is now, but certainly about 2 years ago, if you were looking for a 10 megawatt solar farm connecting in the Brighton and Lewis area, you would get stuck behind a transmission constraint, and you'd be looking at a 10-year connection time.
I saw that recently, I think Chris was saying they were going to put out in the UK, weren't they? Again, probably just trying to use the press to
Leverage.
talk about some site in Yorkshire or something like that. They have 13 years to get good connection. And all their private investors will basically kind of walk away if that was.
Yep. And that's the challenge. And that's what the industry is trying to deal with, because you don't want people to walk away. We need the renewable, low carbon generation to help us get to net zero.
On the other hand, not all the 400 gigawatts development or the project will go ahead.
No, because for the reasons you said, you don't need capacity, do you?
But some of it will not get planning permission. Some of it will, the investors will pull out. A bunch of different things will happen over time. But
And it's not available 24/7.
sorry.
I said that's a peak demand. It's not available 24/7.
Another question? Right.
Okay, another question. Go back to your earlier example, connecting a house, and you type in some numbers, came up 5,000 and 40,000 or something. Supposing you were very near a limit or two and you needed a new 11 kV substation, and instead of 5,000 it was, I don't know, 200,000 or something?
Yep.
What happens then? Does the customer have to find 200,000 or how does it get spread around?
That's a good question. So let me answer that with a couple of pictures if I can. So which one was it? Let's just go here. So by providing the visibility back, the first thing you can say is, well, if you want a 5 kilowatt battery in your house, then it's going to be 100,000. But if you only want a 3 kilowatt battery, it'll be 5,000. You go, oh, okay, I can make do with a 3 kilowatt battery. I'm good. I don't need a 5. That's fine. Is the first step. And actually, when you provide that information to a customer and have a bit of dialogue, it's funny how often that happens. That actually people could make do with less than what they ask for in connections capacity. And so having the information at their fingertips readily available helps people to just be able to poke the numbers and come up with an answer. The other thing is it depends on what is needed. So if you need a new 11 kV substation for a domestic property connection at LV, it's at one voltage level above your voltage of connection. So it is fully funded by the DNO via DUOS. So DNO is Distribution Network Operator. So UK Power Networks in this area. Via DUOS is the Distribution Use of System Charge, which is a portion that comes out of everyone's electricity bill. It's part of the standing charge on your bill. So if you did say, actually, I do need 5 kilowatts, it does need to be 100,000, but it's an 11,000 volt reinforcement. That gets paid for by the DNO, effectively. It gets paid for ultimately by all of us as bill payers in this area. But it's the DNO's responsibility now to say not just what it used to be, which was actually I need to provide the lowest cost for reinforcement this capacity, what is the lowest cost view from the system, from the whole point of view, considering all the different options available to make that work. And actually, because of that, they can often do it for less money and reduce the overall cost.
Do you see farmers apply connections to put PV panels and glass batteries in the farm?
I don't specifically. I'm sure that many do, because there's a big industry in terms of helping people to get solar and storage set up. But it's primarily what I and my team support is more of the smaller connections. So it's more the domestic, the LV, and running that through our automated systems. But I know there are many people who do that.
What is the maximum capacity of single-phase domestic?
So it's 80 amps continuous is the maximum that the DNOs will allow on a single-phase service cable, which I'm going to do the maths at 23 kilowatts, but I think that's wrong. I'd have to get a calculator out to check. Sorry.
Okay, we
It's
have
the end
one
of
more
the-
question.
Certainly multiply by 80.
One more question.
The acceptable quote, you said that comes with caveat and it might change, but people can pay it.
Yeah.
So what happens if they pay it and then it changes?
Then they have to pay an additional sum.
What if they say, actually, I don't want to pay that? I mean, how much might it go initially? Are we talking about 10% or more?
The short answer is it depends. The longer answer is it can be quite a big amount, because if you suddenly find that actually there is an ancient monument or some archaeology along the route that you were going to take, and suddenly you've got to take a cable route that is twice as long, it could be a significant amount more. And so it could be actually it's not economic, we're going to stop.
So do they get a refund then if they already paid in and they want to back out?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's something that I am very happy to find out and come back to you.
And what if it went down by 10% or something, do they get that back?
It very rarely goes down. There are a few unknowns that would make the price go down. Potentially it could if there was discovered to be an existing road crossing, some ducts under the road, so you didn't have to shut the roads, you didn't have to do a portion of the trenching, then the price might go down. I understand that in those cases it does, but don't quote me on that. I need to check and come back and confirm.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. This is generally the system you're talking about is a reactionary. It says, right, I now need to build this substation because I've got this extra person wants. Surely historically there's been some sort of predictive going on here that says there's likely to be an increase of demand there. There's a guy digging a big hole, that probably is going to need a few buildings on it, which are going to need power. Surely some feed into this has to be future, and we need to get from a point where we're not 10 years behind, but we're 10 years ahead again, don't we?
So, excellent question. How are we being proactive? So there is the ESO are responsible for the whole of UK having a forward look nationally, what do we need through to 2050. Each of the distribution network operators now has to produce a DFES, or a distribution future energy scenario, which looks at from the bottom up rather than the top down, saying what is going to be needed to go through from now to 2050. They also are required to produce strategic plans for different areas. And so they've always done regional planning to a certain extent, but there have been restrictions on ability to build ahead of need, to do strategic reinforcement for areas where there's likely to be growth, which in some areas has blocked development.
Does this tool actually start to build some of that picture automatically as well?
It's we don't work at that level with
So
small.
output from it to help people do that.
But the data in terms of the connection volumes that go through what people are looking at can get fed into these future energy scenarios. So they would say, okay, how many, we think we're going to have this spread of electric vehicles or this spread of new developments, and then you can be able to cross-reference this against the data that says what are we actually seeing in terms of connections and connection requests, and then you can align the two. It doesn't do it automatically at the moment.
So that's still a manual kind of exercise for some people.
Sir?
You haven't put on your diagram where you said generation and use from different sources, any of the interconnectors to France, Norway, whatever that can feed the power to and from. How would that come into moderating the electricity usage?
So
Setting interconnectors times 3, but
So the forecast is that by 2050 we will need we will need 3 times the level of interconnectors we currently have. I had the privilege of actually going to visit the ESO control room a little while ago, and I was very surprised by the fact that the main power flow in the UK was from Norway to France.
Via the UK.
Via the UK. So interconnectors change the way that the transmission system operates.
exactly.
And I know nothing more than that. go read the report.
Sir?
Just a comment, when I was in Morocco and I was amazed to hear that they're building this high voltage DC link between Morocco and the UK. It's three courses, it's just incredible. You don't read about it, but 5,000 kilometre high voltage DC cable. So we share our excess wind generation, they share their excess. So
If it comes, I know of it.
yeah.
It is an amazing technological feat. I'm impressed by the size of the pockets of the people who are bankrolling it. And I'm going to stop there before I
Any other questions?
You talked about bringing into this self-service the data for acceptance to connect. So what's the current situation if you have, say, a bunch of other people have already been accepted, you then have your request accepted, and then it turns out that you can't connect, what happens?
It's the DNOs problem. It's the network operator's problem to sort. And the issue is they don't, their data systems. And actually they need to make sure that they've got all of this lined up so that they are only offering the capacity where they've got it. It's less of an issue now because the reinforcement, as we said earlier, is the DNO's problem to pay for. So actually, whereas 2 years ago, they would say, ooh, we've already given that capacity away, you've got to pay for your sole use extension access, and you've got to contribute a bunch of cash to the reinforcement. And you'd probably say, okay, I'm not going to build that, it's not economic for me. But now it's their responsibility to deal with anyway, so it's less of an issue.
Yeah, so previously you might have someone who thinks they're all set up and then they get a license to run.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think maybe just one more question. Does anybody else have another one?
Very quick question. You mentioned data centres soaking up all this capacity in West London. Roughly how much power does a data centre take?
I don't know. I don't know. I only know that the data centre that is in Manor Royal on the old pharmaceutical site in Crawley has 2,000 volt feeds. I don't know how much capacity it takes, but it takes it at 132,000 volts, so a lot is the answer.
So thank you very much indeed for a very interesting lecture. We'd like to express our appreciation of the certificate.
Thank you.
And some IET branded merchandise for your pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed. Afraid the battery ran down.
Sign the list if you haven't already, please. And any ideas to me?